She becomes the first woman attorney to have the privilege, and I was recently corrected by the clerk of the US Supreme Court because I had used the word right. And he said to me, it's not a right, it's a privilege. She was the first woman to have the privilege of bar membership at the US Supreme Court, and the week after, she gets bar privileges at other federal courts. It's a triumphal appearance, and sort of all of Washington comes. We don't have photographs of it, of course, but she's dressed wonderfully in velvet. Her family's there. Her supporters are there. Congressmen are coming in and saying, "What's the buzz? What's the buzz?" You know? And people say, "Oh, Mrs. Lockwood's going to be sworn in a few moments." And indeed, she takes the oath. She kisses the Bible and becomes the first woman member, and opening all of the federal courts to all of the women attorneys who have followed her. This is a photograph that the court provided to us. It shows the court a few years later, but it gives you an idea of what the tableau must have looked like. With her standing there, there were 10 other male attorneys sworn in that day. Now, and this shows that, again, a year later, she moved the admission of a Southern attorney, African-American Samuel Lowry, who was the first African-American attorney from the South to be admitted after the Civil War. And this is her certificate, which is held by the Historical Society in New York State, and which has pretty standard text on it. The question I ask myself as her biographer is, after this incredible triumph, what does she do? Does she go home and have reporters come and chat to them? But this was not this ambitious woman, this woman full of ego and self-esteem, interested in reform with all of the capacities of a leader. She looked to a larger stage, and the stage she looked to was presidential campaigning. Remember that with the exception of a very few territories, women still could not vote anywhere in the US. So where does she get off thinking that she can run for the presidency? Good question, right? Well, some women who today were doing the kind of education work that we might think of in terms of, say, the League of Women Voters, had been talking about women preparing themselves for the day that they did get the vote. Women at this time thought, oh, it's just going to be around the corner. In fact, it was 40 years around the corner, but they didn't know that, and so they were being optimistic. They said, let's get involved in partisan politics. Let's learn something about it, get our feet wet, educate ourselves, get experience, we'll be ready. And Lockwood bought into that argument. And what I've done here is I've taken a postal stamp that was issued in her honor in 1986, next to the picture, of course, of the person who, in fact, wins that campaign, Grover Cleveland. Why does she do it? She has ego, she's restless, but also the women's suffrage people have been turned back by the major parties. Lockwood went to the Republican convention with other women trying to get the party to add women's suffrage to their platform, and they refused. And so she takes up this injunction to get involved in politics and to do it as an act of empowerment and an act of education. And she runs a truly national campaign. She crisscrosses the nation using money from lecture fees to pay, because she runs on something called the Equal Rights Party ticket. But it's really a party that's just something in name only. A few women have made up the name. They have no treasury, they have no organization. So if she's going to run a truly national campaign, she's got to finance it, and she's not a wealthy woman. And so she uses her lecture fees. She begins with rallies, like any campaign. I'm struck over and over again at how Lockwood would fit right in 2007. She approaches reporters. She understands the sound bite. She's just terrific in all of this. She goes around the country and appears in churches, fairs, just all sorts of places. This is her official campaign portrait, which you can see my publisher used as the cover of the book. And I have this problem. I want to ask a couple of questions about this campaign. How did she do it? Was she noticed? What was the impact? Well, I've just told you a little something about how she did it. I was also asked whether she had any supporters who actually got up electoral tickets, and the answer was yes, she did. She had electoral tickets organized in 7 or 8 different states, and we'll see one of the ballots in a minute. There was no photography, and so we don't have pictures of her at these different meetings. But the one visual representation we have that tells us she was noticed are cartoons. This is one that I love. This appeared in a very popular publication of the time called Puck. Some of you may know it. And on the left, we have Benjamin Butler, Civil War general turned congressman, very much caricatured as a rather overweight gentleman in a clown suit with sausages sort of tumbling out, and Lockwood popping up over here, caricatured, but not too terribly. I wanted to ask myself, was she noticed and was she treated? And now here's the question that's so relevant this week after last week's Democratic debate. Was she treated differently because she was a woman candidate? Well, certainly some reporters made comments that they would say things like, I think Belva Lockwood's wearing a false hairpiece, or she's dyeing her hair, or so forth. But for the most part, what interested me in these cartoons is that, she's laughed at, but she's not laughed at any more than the male candidates. Again, we see here in the middle, this is again Benjamin Butler, who was one of the other third-party candidates. Here we have her with Butler again. Somehow the gentleman who was the Temperance Party candidate doesn't show up in the cartoons as much. Here using the myth of Atalanta, the cartoonist depicted the two of them. And so these cartoons suggest to us, at least they suggest to me, that Lockwood was viewed by the media at least as one of the boys. Okay? She had thrown her hat in the ring, and they weren't going to give her any special privileges. But on the other hand, they weren't going to rip into her in a way that was different from the way they ripped into the men. I think that's very, very modern and very commendable. This is one of the ballots that I was telling you about. And what's so interesting to me is that she was sufficiently noticed that the cartoonists were still using her as subject matter a good 7 or so weeks after the election. The date on this cartoon, which I don't think shows on this particular slide, is Christmas of 1884. So we really are talking about 6, 7 weeks after the election. Well, had she won, and she did not, U.S. political history would have looked differently, and some of the people in this room who studies presidents would have had a different tableau to look at. In fact, the vote that she received was very small, only a few thousand votes. But what impresses me about what she did was that it was a statement of women's desire to become part of partisan politics. We had sort of assumed, and right up to the present in our telling of history and our teaching of history, we talk about this period as one in which women were involved with associational work, with temperance, with suffrage, and so forth, but that they weren't interested in politics per se, that was, backroom cigar smoking stuff. And with this book and with work that I've now gone on to do, I'm finding evidence of women being very much interested in partisan politics. And as soon as they can vote in particular, you see women running for office. So I see her campaign as a statement of interest in partisan politics, as a statement of someone who believed women could be good leaders, could be responsible and serious, be a political role model. And that the nation, with campaigns like hers, would move closer to realizing the ideal of democracy. She was trying to make the statement that a vibrant democracy cannot be an exclusive men's club. So my take on it all is that she in fact, gave us a really important civics lesson.